stop to put gas in my truck so I can get onto the house. And make a long story short, the man on the other side of the pump, older guy, driving a big old Cadillac, figured out that I worked offshore, cussed me like a dirty dog. He's driving a brand new Cadillac. He's paying $4.10 a gallon. I'm driving an old Chevy pickup, paying $4.10 a gallon. It's not the entire oil field that gets rich. Most of it just work our ass off. I can go to work in town, but you can't make a living doing that. I can make a living. I can provide for my family here. I don't want to be gone 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, but it's what I have to do.
Do you know what we're paying on the day rate for this rig?
Generally, between 140 to 250,000 a day.
Wow, that adds up pretty quick.
Very quick.
All this effort will only, in its entire life, provide maybe 1 million barrels out of 85 million barrels a day of worldwide consumption. Yeah. We won't even get...
Not a drop in the bucket.
Not a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work for not a drop in the bucket.
It is.
Americans are 5% of the world's population and use 25% of the world's known energy supply.
15 years ago, the United States had 200 million vehicles and the rest of the world had 200 million vehicles. Now the rest of the world has 400 million vehicles.
We never saw it coming. Nobody saw China, nobody saw India. And all of a sudden, here comes this monster.
The politics of oil is such that the guy that gets there first with the most troops might control it.
If the Arabs just stopped the oil today, what would happen to us? How long would we last?
Societies don't last forever. I mean, when was the last time you met a Roman?
Rule number one when you wake up and find yourself in a deep hole is stop digging. And unfortunately, as far as I can determine, we're still throwing shovels into the hole.
Two things happen simultaneously, which has changed the game forever. One is the easy conventional oil has peaked. Secondly, the whole world is now aspiring to the lifestyle of the United States of America. We have allowed ourselves to become the bad guy because as an industry, we've done a poor job of explaining who we are, what we do, how we do it, where we do it, when we do it, and why we do it.
Most Americans feel like the Constitution gives them the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and cheap energy. The only free energy that I know about is sunshine. It's free. God gave it to us. Use all you want. It's free. If you want anything else, electricity, natural gas, gasoline, ethanol, solar panels free. If you want any other type of energy than free sunshine, you got to pay the man that spent his capital to develop it. And if you don't like the price that man charges, don't buy it.
People in the world, a lot of mostly Americans, who think it's their God-given right to consume whatever amount of energy they want, and if we don't produce it enough to keep the price down, that makes us bad guys.
Don't give me the story that oil companies are good for the American people, because I don't think they are. I don't think they have been good corporate citizens. They like us to be dependent on foreign oil because they've got all the deals with all these oil barons in other parts of the world.
The total box office of every movie of Hollywood in a given year, that would represent about, a week to 10 days of one company's revenue, ExxonMobil.
It's the public that owns Exxon. It's the stockholders that own it. They own 99% of Exxon, and the same with Shell, and the same with all major oil companies. The American people own those companies. It's not those executives up at the top. And I've never understood why they didn't say, wait a minute, when you're saying bad old Exxon, you're talking about your next door neighbor.
Price of gasoline goes up, they look at all oil companies as the bad guys. Exxon, Shell, BP, Texaco. People don't understand that they spend billions and billions of dollars to supply that gasoline and supply that electricity that you have when you plug your electric car into the outlet. Well, the electricity's made from natural gas, so it all goes back full circle. Yeah, I think we need thousands of electric cars, but they all run off of natural gas because that's what powers the electricity.
I think the oil industry is doing a lot of bad things, but I don't think the people are bad people. I mean, I'm sure there are some bad people. There are some bad people in my organization. I mean, let's be real here. But I think the key problem is the industry is rooted in the past. The industry is not moving forward. It's not progressive. And it's very dangerous in a world that's changing as fast as the world of the 21st century is going to change, to have big, powerful institutions clinging to yesterday. We need to tear the oil industry loose from yesterday and get them thinking about tomorrow.
My great-grandfather, Don Francisco Ituri, acquired this land probably back in the 1870s. We own the minerals, and we made a lease with Blake Energy to come on here and drill for oil. I never dreamed in my lifetime I'd see $100 a barrel oil. It's just incredible. And the higher it goes, the happier I am.
Let's say it's a 3 BCF well, or a price of about $7 an MCF. That would be 2.1 million. So, is that right? 2.1 million?
Yeah.
2,000? That doesn't sound right.
21.
21 million, I'm sorry.
Just a zero.
Wait, I'm off a digit.
Is that gas going south or north?
Actually, that gas is traveling in through the Tennessee line and heading south into Mexico.
Into Mexico?
That's right.
How is that hurting America?
You know, I don't know the answer to that one. Really, a way of describing it's like treasure hunting. There are very high highs when things work for you. You find new reserves. You know, there's nothing better. Emotionally, when you drill a dry hole, it's, you know, there's a lot of money that is just gone.
Yeah, that's why he's a wildcatter and I'm not. He said if he hits a dry hole, move on.
Yeah.
If I hit a dry hole and lost all that money, I'd go home and stay in bed for a month.
A wildcatter is one who drills wells in areas where you don't know whether you will find anything or not. So he's a risk taker.
A century ago, the wildcatters worked with a willow twig, a magic wand which by purest accident did determine the drilling of some of America's first commercial oil wells.
The operator goes in and says, we're going to drill in this area. No one's ever drilled here. The chances are pretty remote they'll hit something. They're willing to gamble a lot of money just on the hopes that that well out there will find oil and gas and make them money.
It's the highest form of compliment, I think, in our business. You are a person that is willing to go and take big money and put it into a feature or a geological setting that has never been tested before.
So we had to take one of our drilling people and lower him in by helicopter with a chainsaw in the middle of this jungle on Borneo Island and come back a little later to see if he had survived and if an area had been cleared large enough so we could fly the rig in later. They may go broke once, they'll be back again. They may go broke several times and be back again.
You may find nothing 20 times in a row, and it may be that 21st time that you find something, and that happens more than you'd like to believe.
It's like about 4 straight shots of tequila. It's hallelujah, praise the Lord. And I've had it not many times in my life. You get a good discovery, you go to the bar and start drinking, have a celebration. You get a dry hole, you go to the bar, drown your sorrows. You gotta laugh. That's one thing. Mother Nature is mean to the rancher, the cowman, the farmer. She's mean to an oil man. And you deal with it by a sense of humor. You laugh at your bad luck.
Kind of give you an example of some of the fun we've had. This well here came on at 1,000 barrels a day, right outside of Houston, in Brookshire, and it's really sweet crude oil.
That was our
about
friend,
2,000 feet deep.
That was our
That's
friend,
on
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams land.
Yeah, Jim Williams.
Try that.
God rest his soul.
And anyway, when this
that smells good.
Isn't it great?
That's
what
sweet
I love is
crude.
when this comes out of the ground, right out of the ground, it smells so good. I've taken a sip of it before. I'm not kidding you. Took it to the Palm restaurant one night and put it on my salad.
Oh,
little oil and vinegar. It's pretty good.
That smells tremendous.
Now, back here, this one we found not too long ago. That's good oil.
Oh man, let me
Try
have a
that.
shot.
Well, I think the Hollywood image of an oil man is kind of a big oil guy, like the guy that works for, that's the CEO of one of the big oil companies, who is some cigar chomping bossy guy that is sitting in rooms conspiring to try to make things happen.
When I ran for governor, they followed the campaign in England. And they had a picture and they said it's Clayton Williams with his feet crossed on top of Mercedes like JR. I mean, that was the image that the world likes to picture an oil man, and it's insulting to us, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. JR's worst thing ever happened for our image because he's a slimy, nice-looking crook that took advantage of everybody, and everybody loved to hate him.
Wendell, touch that painting and I'll kill you where you stand.
People believed that show was real, and it was a TV show. There may be other TV shows that aren't quite real, you reckon?
You know, I think that you look at those TV shows like that, it gets cutthroat in our industry like that. I mean, it's whoever gets there first. If there's a big lease play going on, you better be the one that gets that lease first, because the old saying is, without the lease, there's no grease. You know, without the grease, there's no oil. Without no oil, there's no good income. This structure here is 12 miles long and 3 miles wide, and it's got about 400 million barrels. We'll probably develop 1.2 billion barrels of oil. That's probably 2 to 5% of the reserves of the United States we can increase by.
Ooh, that's an oil deal.
Yeah,
buddy.
that's a good oil deal. It's about a $3 or $4 billion return.
Yeah, you could buy a couple of snake dinners.
PAX is one of those socially responsible
Right.
funds, right? They just agreed to pay some big fine for investing in companies outside their charter, right? Because they're socially responsible, so they're not supposed to have anything, ugly in them, like, tobacco and alcohol. Well, the first company listed on the list of those that they had in the fund they weren't supposed to have was Anadarko Petroleum. Now, that's when you know Rome is burning.
It's because the people that don't know what they're talking about are in charge. The protesters can't drive to a protest on what the Sierra Club produces. Hot air doesn't get you anywhere. So that's what I think's so funny about it. The only thing hot air might do is help Boone Pickens with his wind farms.
Public thinks, gasoline comes from
the pump. That's right. Where do we get our oil? Oh, at the Shell station on the corner.
Almost as ignorant as where they think electricity comes from.
The socket.
Well, it's keeping the price of oil and gas high. I guess you could thank them for that. They're generating the record profits.
They are. They're generating the record profits, and they're certainly benefiting from them.
All you have to do is constrict supply and keep demand going up.
All you have to do is keep fear in the market.
Right, fear in the market.
Keep it in the headlines, the fear of disruption.
If they ever learn the basic theory of supply and demand, we could be in trouble.
That's right. Yeah, to them it's supplying the man,
Yeah.
not demand.
The man. I like that.
We kind of don't even have a clue. When you turn on the switch for electricity, how many Americans can tell you 50% of it's generated by coal, 30% by nuclear, and 20% by natural gas? I'll bet you 1 in 5,000, if that. The fact that we don't know that is a dangerous, dangerous thing for our country. We are still the only nation on Earth that I'm aware of, and I've been to most places, where the energy resources are not fully exploited that are domestically available. When you see the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge being put up for a vote in Congress, which has been done over and over again, as a possible domestic oil source for this country, you don't see what the ANWR really is. What you see is you see snow-capped mountains. And those ads are paid for by California-based environmental associations.
Well, we drill in a lot of Alaska. There are parts of Alaska which are in fact oil fields, and we should continue to drill in the oil fields. We are opposed to drilling the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It is the calving ground for a huge caribou herd, and caribou do not want, nor should they have to, have their babies in an oil field.
Caribou now love the pipeline, and there are more caribou now than there were before they started drilling.
90% of the coast of Alaska has been turned over to the oil industry to be developed as oil fields. We think that saving the remaining 10% of the coast of Alaska is kind of a reasonable compromise.
If only a very small percentage of the world's space is set aside as wilderness, and that's true, just only a small percentage is set aside as government-protected wilderness on the surface of this planet, why do you always need to make exceptions to allow development in that relatively small space?
Clearly, we've had global climate change long before man ever contributed to any kind of emissions, so that I'm not persuaded that it's only due to man-made emissions that this is occurring, nor just to hydrocarbon sources.
Somebody making $40,000 a year is not sitting there worrying, in my opinion, about global warming near as much as they're worrying about how to put food on their table the next day for their family.
There's some observable global warming that's taking place. As a scientist, I will tell you that I have a hard time imagining that it's caused by humans.
Yeah, I have a science background, so I look at it with a little different perspective. I know for a fact the globe has heated and cooled ever since it was created. And it is not something that's man-made. And this hype that you hear today about the man-made global warming and we're causing this and causing that, it's just not true.
The world's climate scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is real, global warming is serious, it is largely man-made, and we can do something about it. That is not in dispute scientifically, and the fact that a guy who knows a lot about petroleum geology wants to argue with a guy who knows a lot about the ice cap makes about as much sense as my telling you where to drill a hole. And the fact is, I drill a dry hole, and when they play climate scientists, they get it wrong.
The scariest channel on TV right now is the Weather Channel, right? You don't have to get on Netflix to have a scary night. Just watch the Weather Channel. Iowa was underwater, Arkansas underwater. We have a 12-month fire season now in California. We have droughts, we have floods. It's getting biblical. Don't tell me about 50 years from now, your grandmama can tell you the weather is wacky today. So we've been taking our carbon out of the ground and putting it up into the air. That's called a combustible engine. That's called the Industrial Revolution. And at some point, we got to stop doing that because if we keep going the way we're going to bake the planet. At the same time, we need to respect and honor the people in the oil industry, in the coal industry, who've gotten us to this point. They're heroes in a way. They got society from the horse and buggy to the jet age. and they need to be retired with dignity. I would say retire them with dignity, with honor. Stop the name calling. Let's work together. It is possible to go from the oil age to the solar age in a way where the wisdom and the genius of our existing energy sector is tapped and utilized. They know more about energy than anybody else. We now need to use that genius for the next stage.
I was born in 1934 in Iran, Texas, what was a Marathon Oil Company camp in the nurses' quarters because we didn't have a doctor in town. Mrs. Greenhall delivered 70 children. An oil camp is where the company builds small houses for the employees to live in. There was probably 8 or 10 oil company camps scattered around this little town of 900 people. And the camps would have a minimum of 10 or 15 houses up to 100 houses. I had started to work in the oil field on a pulling unit when I was 12 years old. I worked as a roughneck. I was working as a derrick man up in the top of the derrick by the time I was 16 or 17 years old. I worked in the summers for the 5 years that I went to Texas A&M. I was studying petroleum engineering. I came to Houston with $2,500, 3 little kids. I immediately caught on as a consultant. I was working for most of the banks in town. Our firm was reporting reserves on about 15% of the total flowing gas in the United States, thousands and thousands of wells. Say in about 1930, that's when the East Texas field was discovered, the largest field in the United States before Prudhoe Bay, 7 billion barrels. And they had derricks that were derrick leg to derrick leg, solid. I mean, they were drilling them as close as this room to each other. And they flooded the market, and they drove the price of oil to 10 cents a barrel. 10 cents a barrel. Well, then they sent the National Guard in to shut the field in. The Railroad Commission then was the only agency that was big enough to govern the oil business, so they incorporated it into what they called the Railroad Commission that did control the railroads. Then they got specialists that would become the commissioners and it became an elected office. Well, in pretty short order, Texas was the OPEC of the day. And the way they began to control the price of oil was by, quote, proration. By the 1950s, where we had lots of oil, they would set, quote, the producing days at 8 days a month. You can only produce 25% of what your well is capable of producing. So we were holding oil off of the market to drive the price of oil to $3 a barrel. The public was saying, you're controlling the price of the product. And the Railroad Commission's official answer was always, no, we're not controlling the price, we're conserving energy, which was a good thing to say, because everybody's for conservation. What we were really doing is we were conserving $3 a barrel.
Such scientific conservation methods mean progress, and nobody knows it better than the state conservation man who works with the oil companies.
That's right. Taking out oil as fast as possible is inefficient and wasteful. Well, time to eat.
And we controlled the price of oil in the United States, virtually the whole world, from the early 30s until 1973.
We were so lucky because if we were talking in the mid to late 1960s, everybody, with the exception of maybe a handful of people, believed that there was no reason to assume that the United States wouldn't be the largest producer of oil on Earth. You know, gasoline was so cheap, and the demand was going like this. We built our federal highway systems all on the concept that we would be the mightiest oil producer forever, and we'd have so much left we could export it to, most other parts of the world. Turned out that old Dr. M. King Hubbert, who in 1956 gave this shrill warning, the United States was going to probably peak in the early 70s and thereafter go into irreversible decline. We peaked at December 1970.
The first 100 years of this business were from 1870 to 1970, an era of total U.S. control and of plenty. That all ended in 1970, when the U.S. reached capacity. As that happened, the foreign producing governments and exporters, the OPEC countries, realized that they could then move in and have control of this business. That's when they began their expropriations.
They were not happy with $3 a barrel for oil. We had enough capacity there, we thought, to be able to handle OPEC. We didn't. We were producing about 50 million barrels, and OPEC had 28 million barrels of capacity, maybe 30 million. So they had over half of the capacity for oil in the world. Well, in '73, OPEC shut us off, period. Once they cut the oil off, then the market is willing to pay whatever the going price is to get it back in here. Well, immediately it doubled to $6 a barrel. Gasoline lines were 3 hours long in '73 and '74.
In all of the 186 State of the Union messages, this is the first in which the one priority, the first priority, is energy. I have been assured through my personal contacts with friendly leaders in the Middle Eastern area that an urgent meeting will be called in the immediate future to discuss the lifting of the oil embargo. Let this be our national goal. At the end of this decade, in the year 1980, the United States will not be dependent on any other country for the energy we need to provide our jobs, to heat our homes, and to keep our transportation moving.
Once they turned the spigot back on, once they started sending the ships back in, we had plenty of oil, plenty of gasoline. We were happy again. Now oil is floating up because they kept shutting the oil back. You've got a relatively small population, 10 million people, that's got the rest of the world held hostage.
Make no mistake, we do have a real energy problem. 1/3 of our oil, 17% of America's total energy, now comes from foreign sources that we cannot control. We must push with renewed vigor and talent research in the use of non-fossil fuels, the power of the atom, the heat of the sun, and the steam stored deep in the earth. The force of the winds and water must be main sources of energy for our grandchildren, and we can do it. I went before your senators and representatives in Congress with a comprehensive plan to make our country independent of foreign sources of energy by 1985. Now, what did the Congress do in February about energy? Congress did nothing. What did the Congress do in March? What did the Congress do in April about energy? In May, Congress did nothing and went home for a 10-day recess. As of now, the Congress has done nothing positive to end our energy dependence.
So what were the lessons that we learned from that?
I don't think we learned any lesson from it. I mean, we knew that we would never be self-sufficient for oil again. Everybody that was running for president said we're going to be self-sufficient. Nixon did, everybody. But anybody down in the trenches like us knew that we were not going to be.
Now, I know that some of you may doubt that we face real energy shortages. The 1973 gas lines are gone. But our energy problem is worse tonight than it was in 1973. It's worse because more waste has occurred and more time has passed by without our planning for the future. The oil and natural gas that we rely on for 75% of our energy are simply running out. In spite of increased effort, domestic production has been dropping steadily at about 6% a year. Imports have doubled in the last 5 years. And our nation's economic and political independence is becoming increasingly vulnerable.
We knew it wasn't there. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out, really. I mean, you can plot the production of the United States and it's got a decline to it. Probably a fifth grade girl with a ruler could figure out, hey, this is decline, this is going down.
If we fail to act soon, we will face an economic, social, and political crisis that will threaten our free institutions.
After the Iranian Revolution, prices rose 2.5 times. Everyone was forecasting that oil was going to go to $80 to $100 a barrel. Based on continuing demand in a diminished supply environment.
It's sort of a boom-bust cycle. In the 70s, we had the price of oil go from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel, and we all thought it was going to $80 a barrel. There were projections of straight line increases in oil forever.
And people rushed out as if oil was going to continue going up. And they overspent, they overinvested, and created a problem because the supply shortage that the world was seeing at the time was artificially created.
There was so much money to be made, and we were so driven back then, we actually reached a point where the rigs ran our people, meaning we had a rig coming free. We might not have done the geology work, we might not have done the engineering work, but land had a permit to drill the next well in Oklahoma. And I guarantee you this went on in Oklahoma. They'd slide the rig over to the next section and spud a well, start drilling. The work was shoddy. We were trying to do too much with the manpower we had and the technology we had at the time.
There were bumper stickers saying, if you don't have an oil well, get one. And that had more to do with encouraging an overreaction by the industry that was not economic and ultimately not good for the supply of oil or for the oil industry.
It wasn't a $40 oil that brought on all of the supply. The new supply basically came from, where it really mattered, came from Western Siberia, from the North Slope, and the North Sea. And those resources were discovered in 1967, 68, and 69. It just took a decade to bring them on.
Never before in our history have Americans been called upon to face 3 grave threats to our very existence, any one of which could destroy us. We must overcome something the present administration has cooked up, a new and altogether indigestible economic stew. 1 part inflation, 1 part high unemployment, 1 part recession, 1 part runaway taxes, 1 part deficit spending, seasoned with an energy crisis. It's an economic stew that has turned the national stomach. Those those who preside over the worst energy shortage in our history tell us to use less so that we'll run out of oil, gasoline, and natural gas a little more slowly. Well, now, conservation is desirable, of course, but we mustn't waste energy. But conservation is not the sole answer to our energy needs. America must get to work producing more energy.
In 1982, the Reagan administration came in, cut the tax incentives by 35 to 40%, cut them in half, where you couldn't write off what you were drilling back then, the only part of it, 60%. You'd have to capitalize the rest of it, and cut the depletion allowance. Cut it to 15% on the first 1,000 barrels a day. 2 years later, there were 2,000 rigs running in the United States. We lost 2,500 of our rig force. In 1986, the price of oil went to $9 a barrel. There were 900 rigs running. That's it. You went from 4,500 to 900 rigs. That's an 80% drop in the capacity to supply energy to this country. Now, no one's going to drill a well at $9.
When he was vice president for Reagan, Bush went to the Saudis and convinced King Fahd to increase oil production in the 80s, which drove the price of oil from $30 a barrel to $10. It bankrupted the Soviet Union, allowing Reagan to win the war on communism.
At the time, Russia was one of the largest exporters of oil in the world. It hurt them financially. They could not pay for the war and run their country, and we shut them down. Ingenious idea, but it broke all the independent oil and gas operators.
It damn near killed the American production industry.
I went flat broke back in 1987, down to zero.
Did I?
Yeah.
Lose money?
Yeah.
During the 80s? I lost my job a few times.
No, and we didn't lose money. We shouldn't videotape that either.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Don't worry.
No,
Okay.
no.
We lost over 200,000 people in the petroleum industry. 200,000. Never heard anything about it. They're talking about the laid off automobile workers today in Michigan. We had way more than they've had laid off in Michigan. But you never heard a word about it. Nobody was sympathetic with us losing 200,000 people.
The difference between an oil man and a pigeon in those bad days, a pigeon could still make a deposit on a Mercedes. My company went from 1,200 to about 100, about the same. As we expanded, and then, holy mackerel, we can't pay our bills. I was an expert at layoffs and letting people go and cutting back and salary cuts. And we were this size, hallelujah, you get shrink. And before long, you're nobody. It was a really, real bitch. Some of my friends committed suicide. They owed a lot of money and they couldn't handle it. Just like you remember Wall Street or the Depression, people jumped out of buildings. There was some of that, but there was like health related. It so stressful. A guy had a big ego. I'm a big oil man, look at me, and all of a sudden I'm nobody. And a lot of people couldn't handle it. The way I handled it, there was quite a few nobodies that were left, so I fit in pretty well at the time.
Price of oil was so cheap, which was terrible for us as oil people. But it was so cheap that nobody thought anything about trying to conserve any of it. That's when I used to talk to Washington and everybody yawned. I said, oh no, yeah. Thanks for telling us, Bob.
We spent 3 decades believing that first of all, we were back to normality, that it was normal for oil prices to stay in kind of a $15 to $20 range, even though we were bankrupting the oil service industry. You couldn't afford to do real drilling. We thought it was normal when the price would occasionally collapse down to 10 and the industry was almost insolvent because the consumer loved it.
People began to forget the embargo. When energy prices were cheaper, we ceased investing in some of the renewables, which we had invested in the 1970s. And for a period of time, we treaded water.
So we got comfortable again in the 1980s that there was plenty of oil out there. And if we could just keep the geopolitical situation under good management, that we had all the oil we would ever need.
I did marry the man who founded what became Enron, and he was very powerful in the energy business. My husband started dealing in the Middle East. I certainly didn't intend to be an expert on the Middle East. I never even heard of it when I was growing up, the underbelly of the world, Pakistan. And they asked if he would help by serving as consul general. And he said, there is no way that I can possibly do it, but why don't you take Joanne? I ended up an ambassador for Pakistan, which is, extraordinary. Because I was an advisor to President Zia, I was there and I saw what was happening. I asked myself, what are the Russians doing in Afghanistan? There is nothing in Afghanistan. And then it hit me, the Straits of Hormuz. You could fly from Pakistan and bomb the Straits of Hormuz, and the energy to the United States would be cut off. Now, that wasn't just our air conditioners and our cars. That was our aircraft carriers. That was everything. That was our economy, our defense. The Republicans said to me, Joanne, we can't get $3 million for Nicaragua. How are we going to get any money for Afghanistan? So I started going to the Democrats, and I went to Charlie Wilson, and Charlie saw it immediately. And all the Republicans and Democrats then began to work together. It was the most successful covert operation in U.S. history, and it was because we were not a divided nation.
The Gulf situation helps us realize we are more economically vulnerable than we ever should be. Americans must never again enter any crisis, economic or military, with an excessive dependence on foreign oil and an excessive burden of federal debt.
Till recently, we've had a very consistent energy policy in this country. It's a policy based on the equilibrium of power stability. Starting after World War II, that there was no way for the United States and the Western world to do without Middle East oil supplies. For none of the 5 major powers in the region to ever be too weak or too strong. Those 5 being Israel, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And if necessary, we would switch sides of support to achieve that. In the long-running Iraq-Iranian war, we didn't want either side to win. And we supplied all kinds of materials and everything to one side or the other and switched sides, and we achieved that objective. In the Gulf War, that's why the decision was made not to go to Baghdad. And when you take one player out in a complicated power equilibrium region, you set in motion an unpredictable cascading set of future events.
Imagine all that oil out of Iraq, I'll bet you every drop of it said in the United States, which is a good thing. We need it.
We really don't care where we get oil. We just want oil, period.
We're not there for the farmland. And I don't think we're there for the desert. I don't think we're there to spread democracy everywhere, because we sure don't spread it to the countries that don't have any oil now, do we?
If there was a lot of oil in Africa, a lot, as much as there is in Iraq, and they've got genocide going on over there, and they've been having it for 10 years, we would be in the middle of Africa today.
The U.S. Department of Defense is the largest energy consumer in the world. I think they use about 500,000 gallons a day. And they are by far the largest individual consumer of all types of energy worldwide.
we should engage in a very, very detailed national debate about where our energy policy ought to go. Our energy policy should not be aircraft carriers in the Middle East.
Well, my oldest brother had a solution for it. He said we should invade Saudi and take all their oil and just take them over and incorporate them as part of the United States. That would have been a solution.
And this dependence is a challenge to our economic security, because dependence can lead to price shocks and fuel shortages. And this dependence on foreign oil is a matter of national security. To put it bluntly, sometimes we rely upon energy sources from countries that don't particularly like us.
Right now, foreign governments, countries, own about 80% of the world's production reserves. That's a very high number. Most people think that Exxons and Chevrons own a lot of the production around the world. They don't.
In the 70s, you had already started restricting access. You had the windfall profits tax. You had a bunch of public policy that made it easier for you to go international to make money. We did that successfully. We did it successfully in Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, everywhere else. Then all of a sudden, those countries said, well, thank you very much, Exxon. Thank you, Chevron. Thank you, Superior Oil, for coming over here and help us find things. But by the way, we'd like to nationalize it now. We'll control prices back at you. We're producing from what we thought were American companies, and were, to now we're bringing it in from national oil companies. Now it's subject to politics.
It's a bad image when gasoline prices go up based on supply and demand, and they think that the oil companies are stealing because they're all rich. Well, Exxon's one of the biggest corporations in the world, and they're not even the top oil company. I think they're number 14 on the list, or 13, or they're way down there. And all these other countries around the world, the government owns all the gasoline. We're the only free enterprise system in the world that allows people to own gasoline. Look, Bin Laden could shave, dye his hair blonde, dress up in a coat and tie, and come over here and go into business tomorrow morning drilling wells in the United States of America. Anybody can. That's the free enterprise system. That's what it's all about. I mean, everybody has an opportunity here. Can they come in and buy one of our major companies? No, we already shut that down when China tried to buy Chevron. We will let them do it.
The Chinese have moved more people into the middle class in the last decade than exists in the United States of America. I mean, it's staggering to think about that. They have moved 300 million people into the middle class ranks from poverty.
20 years ago, there would be 1,000 bicycles going through an intersection. Now there's 1,000 cars. That's oil demand. They want oil. They want more crude oil. They want more energy. And they're willing to pay for it.
They had 20,000 miles of road 10, 12 years ago. Now they got 200,000 miles of road. They're using half of the cement in the world today.
They're adding 1,000 cars a day. So how many cars is that in a year?
Two right there. We were at war with China in Korea when I was a young man. And now we're interdependent, aren't we? China owns probably more of our treasury bonds than we do.
America has fallen prey to a certain greed, and I'm just as bad as anybody else. I have loved buying the cheap Chinese stuff, but it has been like the Lorelei, you know, that they sang on the rocks, and the sailors would listen and they would say, "Ooh, how wonderful," and they would crash on the rocks and die. There is a bracelet being built around the United States. China, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela would line up together and try to conquer us, not with a warship or planes, but economically with oil.
We must realize that we're dealing with a world. That world can go on without us now.
The single biggest reason that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor is that we accidentally put a sanction on no more oil to Japan. We were supplying Japan with all its oil. And so they decided we had to invade Southeast Asia for their oil, and so we better actually bomb the US fleet. If we get into energy scarcity, then people are going to start hoarding, and the bullies get it first, and then people start slugging their neighbors. And we have some nasty weapons, so when I casually say if we don't get our head around this, we'll blow ourselves up, you know, unfortunately, that's probably something we would need to worry about if we just laugh at peak oil.
Oh, this hole we got stuck in, we were almost to TD and we're stuck. Craig, even though that's the case, I can show you some wells that are some very good wells that had no gas. God dang it. I know it just sucks. He's ready to pull the plug. All right. If there's not the chance for a fairly reasonable profit, you're not going to take the risk. I'll go make widgets or whatever. You know, if you get a steady return on a simple investment where you know what it's going to be, it may not be as much return, but you don't have the risk of losing it. And we just lost $2.5 million on that well today. And it's gone. It's not coming back. It's gone.
Right now, all refining in America is maxed out, and they will not let you build new ones. If you try to even take an old one where it's only working at, say, 30% of its capacity, it takes you years to get approval to upgrade and expand on any new refiner. I know because I just went through this.
Do we have enough refineries? No. Is the refining business a difficult business? Yes, very difficult. Low profit margin. Heavily regulated.
Can you imagine how bad it is to produce your oil here and export it to another country to get it refined? Because you can't get it done here? And then you pay to ship it back. And then they wonder why there's $120 oil? I mean, Christ, just the shipping alone and everything, when you do that, it's going to raise the price of it $20, $25 a barrel right there.
We had quietly been liquidating inventories for the last, year and a half, because actually quite a few times demand outstripped supply, and so what do? We just use up what's in the tank. We sort of had a false sense of empowerment that we had a magic wall. So we went into the hurricanes very vulnerable for no cushion. And then when Ike was over, the American Petroleum Institute published a nice cheery relief saying, oh, we're so lucky the energy infrastructure was unscathed. That just shows how robust we are. Well, our gasoline stocks, as reported by the government, are back to where they last were in August 1967. We forgot to tell motorists that actually the hurricanes did matter, and they maimed the Gulf of Mexico, they maimed the refineries, and so we have a small product coming in and a large use going out, and when we drain the system, we're going to run out of gas. When we're out of gas, we will be out of diesel, because the two go hand in hand. Then we have an interesting about 5 to 10 day window before America runs out of food. So we basically just all on the mantra of free market efficiency pressed ourselves right at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and now the car is about to tip over.
I know all of you can't see this, so I'm going to write really large. But we now are importing almost $700 billion worth of oil every year. Bob Dole said, you see that dog there? And I said, no dog there. He said, yes, there's a dog there. It's a sleeping dog. I said, well, if you say so. And he said, politicians do not wake up sleeping dogs. Energy's a sleeping dog, and he said, Bill Clinton's not going to wake up that dog, and I'm not either. This is not a war where people are killed. This is a war, though. And don't think it isn't, because we have to reduce the dependency on foreign oil.
Energy exists in the background of everyone's mind. People don't understand it. They don't appreciate the economics involved in finding and supplying American or worldwide energy consumption. The politicians don't talk about it because they don't understand it, and they don't understand what drives it. Congress doesn't do much, thank goodness, because they don't fully appreciate what's going on.
And every year they promise they're going to do something about energy dependency, and all we've done is had a steady decline in amount of U.S. production versus imports. And so I think, you know, the American consumer's not that dumb. At some point in time, you're going to go, that's a hollow promise.
We have had a national energy policy for years, and we have one right now. And the national energy policy is we want cheap gas and a lot of it forever. But we don't want to pay any price for it. So that's our policy. Give us $1.50 gasoline, guys. That's the policy. Well, you just don't decree that. It just doesn't happen.
Every time the 250 million Americans that live in this country go to the gas pump, it's not George W.'s fault. It's not Bill Clinton's fault. It's not George Sr.'s fault. And it's not Jimmy Carter's fault. It's all of their faults altogether, because none of them created a solid energy policy to move forward with in this country. None of them.
It begins with energy. We know the country that harnesses the power of clean, renewable energy will lead the 21st century. And yet it is China that has launched the largest effort in history to make their economy energy efficient. We invented solar technology, but we've fallen behind countries like Germany and Japan in producing it. New plug-in hybrids roll off our assembly lines, but they will run on batteries made in Korea. Well, I do not accept a future where the jobs and industries of tomorrow take root beyond our borders, and I know you don't either. It is time for America to lead again. We will double this nation's supply of renewable energy in the next 3 years. We've also made the largest investment in basic research funding in American history, an investment that will spur not only new discoveries in energy, but breakthroughs in medicine and science and technology. We will soon lay down thousands of miles of power lines that can carry new energy to cities and towns across this country. And we will put Americans to work, making our homes and buildings more efficient so that we can save billions of dollars on our energy bills. But to truly transform our economy, to protect our security and save our planet from the ravages of climate change, we need to ultimately make clean, renewable energy the profitable kind of energy. So I ask this Congress to send me legislation that places a market-based cap on carbon pollution and drives the production of more renewable energy in America. That's what we need.
I would like to ask you to hold hands, and we're going to ask Sarah to say grace, please.
Keep us ever mindful of the needs of others, as we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Beautiful.
Family might not appreciate my saying this. I think it's great that Al Gore was given recognition for his service to this world by raising awareness, and there's lots of room for debate on whether he's right or wrong, but give the guy credit for stepping out there and making a difference and trying to, rally troops and forces of good to solve a potential problem that we face as a world, and there needs to be more of that. This is an example of kind of teaching an old dog new tricks. Mom and Dad are putting a windmill into our property in Maine. I was once a wildcatter, and we caused over 30 wells to be drilled, and we found 0 commercially productive oil wells. The typical success in that area may have been 1 in 10. We were over 30. We were overdue for a success.
My grandfather, Robert Lee Blaffer, realized that oil was going to replace coal and lumber, and he decided to come to Spindletop, Texas in 1901 when there was a big gusher and wildcats. And There were oil rigs all over the place.
The Spindletop field ushered in the new oil and gas era. Pools of oil and gas that would be so plentiful that it would replace coal and whale oil. It was all founded on that great spirit of America. I'm in this business because it's in my blood. I'm a third-generation wildcatter. I care about the future that we are going to leave for my kids. We know as good as anybody that oil is not going to be around forever. It's just not. We need wildcatters to come out today, but we need the wildcatters in biofuels, in renewable energy, in all the various sources of energy available.
All of us are originally from the oil business, and what we found in using technologies on the oil field side, we found that we were able to carry these over to the renewable oils, and it's the future. All you need to do with a steam turbine is burn something to make hot water, boil it, you make steam, and the steam provides electricity. This is the first time in North America you've had a refinery large enough, the Safe Renewables refinery is large enough to provide up to 1 million gallons a month of fuel for this turbine.
This is Charles Ack. He's our chemist.
I am unabashedly a geek, science geek. My goal would be to make some type of renewable energy in a responsible manner. This is like our pilot scale algae production unit. Within a couple of days, you can really have a large population of algae that can sustainably produce biodiesel from this oil.
We're doing good things in Houston, which is naturally the energy hub for petroleum worldwide. So as we do the nation's first renewable project here, to be honest, I don't think people believe that a single town can do this by itself and that it can be done commercially without a lot of government help.
I'm sorry. I don't care what anybody tells you. There are not that many more jobs for people on them oil rigs. There are not that many more jobs for people in the coal mines. That is a dead-end solution economically. But there are many, many millions of jobs in this clean energy revolution.
This is a planetary reactor we live on. We're using here the raw and clean heat of the earth on a sustainable basis. We're working with Mother Nature. We're not working against her. You do the science, you pull the money together, you have a team of people that knows what they're doing. They come in and evaluate the resource. It takes years to get ready, and then you drill and you find the steam, and it's just a great feeling. This drill rig come right out of the oil patch, and our workers over here come right out of the oil patch too.
I've been in the oil field about 14 years. Now I'm drilling to geothermal. I've been out here probably about 2 months. Just started to leave.
What's the difference?
Just pretty much the same thing, just drill a hole.
We say we stand on the backs of giants. A number of the big oil and gas companies were in here, independents and majors alike, and they were drilling for steam. They found steam. A few of those projects got the limited power contracts that were available. Those projects went ahead and got developed, and then at $10 oil and so on, the oil and gas industry went through retrenchment from geothermal, retrenchment from oil and gas. This is good for the economy, and this is good for the environment. This is good for America. Well, you may hit her big, and you may hit her small. And there's a damn good chance you won't hit her at all. But I'll tell you now, mister, ain't nothing around like riding that drilled bit deep in the ground. But I'll tell you, when you hit that natural steam, there's nothing like it. I mean, look at this.
Guys that are on the edge right now looking for alternative energies and energy supplies from new and different areas, certainly their Wildcat mentality. It's a mentality more than anything else. Willing to risk it all. When they succeed, it's very good, and when you fail 10 in a row, it's not so good.
Sweetwater Wind Energy goes to Houston and Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, all the major metro areas of central Texas. In West Texas, we've got a saying, we just say, get her done. It's just get the problem solved. Both political parties are trying to find ways to trip the other side. It's like, oh, if we manipulate the vote to be such and such, then clearly the other party will look bad. And I really don't care which party looks bad. I just want the United States to look better. All the cost of a wind power plant is at the beginning. It's as if you built a gas-fired power plant and bought all your natural gas for the next 50 years when you built the plant. This is not going away. I mean, once that turbine is here, it's here for 30 years, 50 years. I mean, they've taken, in California, 90 turbines down and put 6 of exactly what we have back here for the same output. You've got families who are suddenly having new income from wind turbines on their land. You've got people who are going to work for wind companies, so they have new income.
They started in '02 and took about a year. We wanted to help with the environment and the energy that they would create. I think of them as ballerinas dancing on top of the mountains.
Folks around here have lived here 100 years, 125 years on the same land. They care, whether it's about an oil spill or is that wind turbine going to keep spinning 30 years from now. I mean, they really care what the land's about because they own the land.
The city of Houston, incidentally, purchases more renewable power than any other city or state in the country. We purchase wind, and we purchase it cheaper than electrical power produced by natural gas. So I'm all for wind energy, but guess what? In some places of this nation, the wind doesn't blow as much and as regularly as it does in other parts of the nation. Guess what? You can't store electricity. Guess what? You can't transport electricity over long distances like you could other commodities. And for all those reasons, wind is going to be important, but it won't be the only thing that we rely on.
I'm Dr. Wade Adams. I'm the director of the Richard E. Smalley Institute for Nanoscale Science and Technology at Rice University. Let's think of transitioning our energy system from transporting mass around the world, from transporting heavy things like oil and coal and gas, and go toward a system that transmits electricity through wires around the world. When we build windmills in the panhandle of Texas, and when we put solar farms in Arizona, and the need for the energy is actually Boston and New York and Chicago, the current grid is not capable of sending that energy that far without losses that cost too much. So we need a better wire. It has the properties, at least in this form, that it'll conduct electricity much better than copper. We will have the capability to rewire our grid to carry vast amounts of current, long distances without loss. Imagine giant solar farms in the Sahara sending electricity to Norway. I mean, those are the kinds of things you could do if we have this capacity, and it's all going to be enabled by nanotechnology. The solutions to our energy problems are difficult and they're many-fold, but it's not rocket science. It's energy science. It's science we can do, and it's science that people can understand and appreciate.
Ultimately, our vision is to bequeath our children and our children's children with a livable planet that they deserve. If past is prologue, and it is, we know that this clean energy revolution will be complicated. But that's why we're here, to build upon our dreams and aspirations, to change the earth. Look to nearby Nellis Air Force Base, and you'll find the world's largest photovoltaic plant, which provides more than 25% of that base's power.
We're here at Nellis Air Force Base, out on our 14 megawatt solar array site.
Solar is fantastic. It's clean, it's renewable.
This particular technology, called photovoltaic, is very inexpensive to maintain.
If you think about history, every single culture has turned to the sun as a source of power, as a source of spiritual leadership in many cases.
Solar is the one free source of energy that is essentially limitless. The sun gives us about 150,000 terawatts. That's 100,000 times more energy coming in every day than we're actually consuming.
The other great thing about it for the Air Force is that it doesn't have any effect on the flying mission.
It produces about 30 million kilowatt hours per year, and it saves the base annually about $1 million.
You don't mine it, you don't drill for it, you manufacture it. And so right now, the state that manufactures the most solar energy in the United States is Ohio. The number 2 state is Michigan. Michigan has the highest unemployment rates in the country, yet by incentivizing and expanding the use of solar in this country, you're going to create jobs in those states that need it the most.
I think the Sierra Club holds back a lot of development for not only energy, but probably other industries as well, by having a standard that says we will have no impact on the environment, none whatsoever.
For the last 115 years, we as an organization specialized in stopping bad things. We got to be pretty good at it. Some people would say we stop good things too.
You can't walk through the woods without having an impact on the environment. The proper public policy debate ought to be whether we can have a reasonable impact on the environment.
2 years ago, when the Sierra Club recognized that global warming was the big challenge we had to deal with, we recognized at the same time, stopping bad things is not going to be enough. We need to make it really easy for good things to happen. We need to accelerate, but we also need to direct innovation. I think there is a huge opportunity here with the independent production of natural gas as a bridge fuel for the next 50 years that can really help this country get off of its dependence on both coal for electricity and oil for automobiles in a really faster way than we can do with renewables and efficiency alone. It's American, it's cleaner, it's patriotic, it's environmental.
Mr. Pope said we need natural gas in cars. That's one of the first things I've heard out of them in some time. I applaud that because he's right. Natural gas is very clean burning. We have abundant supplies. We don't have to import it from enemy nations like Iran. And so let's do it.
When I was young, there was an oil embargo of the United States in 1973. And I was outraged. You know, I was at that age that a lot of people are, 19 years old, studying. And so I said, you know, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start studying the energy business. And my goals were to conserve energy, to make our nation less vulnerable to disruption in oil supplies. I've been mayor at a time when it's grown faster than 18 states combined. And our electrical power consumption for city government, the water sewer system, the streetlights, has gone down by 6% because of energy efficiency.
If you view the problem as being that we have to keep using fuel the way we've always used it, then you get pretty gloomy. Our assumptions about supply and demand in the energy sector are based on the notion that energy equals fuel. And energy doesn't equal fuel. Energy equals the multiplication of fuel times performance. So you can have twice as much energy either by doubling the amount of fuel you use, which is going to be hard, or by doubling the performance of your vehicles, your buildings, your computers, your equipment, which is going to actually be pretty easy and quite economically attractive. We're certainly going to use oil. That's not the issue. We are going to use oil. I don't know if we'll be using oil 100 years from now, but we're going to use oil for quite a while. But we need to begin using oil as a valuable, rare, commodity, as something that we value and use effectively.
The best oil field we will ever discover is the oil field called real energy efficiency and conservation.
Back in the embargo days, all of the lights in downtown Houston were turned off at night. Now they're all turned on all night long. And that's every city in the United States.
If we had stayed with the wisdom of Jimmy Carter 30 plus years ago, who put solar panels on the White House, told us to turn down our thermometers, put on a sweater and said, let's conserve and come up with renewable energy. If we'd stayed on that path for 30 years, we'd be leading the world. We wouldn't even have this problem. We'd be debating something else. The problem is that we started out on the right path, and as soon as the prices went down, we went back the wrong way. I think now we have to have the determination as a people, as a country, to continue to move aggressively, no matter what the price point is.
The estimated demand for energy, the oil and gas, should go up, or is forecasted to go up 50% by the year 2030, so another 25 or so years. I'm supportive of all kinds of alternative energy. My belief is we're going to need everything.
We need to start viewing everything we do personally, as a community, as a nation, as a world, through the prism of sustainability.
I don't think we should pick winners right now. I think we should pick options and fund the bejesus out of all those options and see which ones pay off.
There is no silver bullet out there to solve this problem. It's a whole box of silver bullets that we need to look for.
The Stone Age did not end for the lack of rocks. The oil age will not end for the lack of oil.
It's not just about changing the way that we fuel our buildings and our machines, it's also about changing the way we fuel our movements for change. So much anger, so much finger pointing, so much name calling. We got to go from diesel to solar in ourselves if we're going to solve this problem.
It takes everything. But you know what it's really going to take? It's going to take Democrats and Republicans and have them act like Americans. They don't act like Americans. They act like Democrats and Republicans. This is an American problem that needs to be solved by American people.
I love to sit on the couch and eat chocolate, but I know I can't. And so that's where America is. America is a fat lady that's been indulging herself. And she doesn't have to. She can get along fine without it. And she better learn to do it, because she may be sitting there in the dark.
Tell all the people all the truth. Let's make a brighter day for our youth. And we know you don't want a revolution. 'Cause you know there's no way that we're losing. Hey you, what are you doing? Must be in the family. Hey you, what are you saying? Yeah you, gotta be crazy. You're talking dangerously. You must not see what's happening. It's getting hard. I think it's time you stop to look and really see. I said, hey you, yeah you. Do you know your history and what's been done? Yeah. Will come undone.
Who determines the price per barrel?
I do.
I do.
Okay, that's a wrap.